with Kieran Maguire from University of Liverpool, and with Charlie Marshall, Managing Director of the ECA, which stands for European Club Association. Vamos a tener una charla, una Q&A con dos personas importantes, con Kieran Maguire, que viene de la Universidad de Liverpool, y también con Charlie Marshall, que es el Managing Director de la ECA. La ECA, ya sabéis que es la Asociación Europea de los Clubes, que vamos a intentar ir más allá de lo que esconden todas estas negociaciones entre clubes, la ECA, etcétera, el futuro de las competiciones europeas. We're going to try to go further the ECA and the negotiations and the future of the European club competition. So welcome, Kieran Maguire and Charlie Marshall. Please, a big applause for them. Oh, Kieran. Thank you. Cheers a lot, Charlie. So, Kieran, over to you.
Okay, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Kieran Maguire from Liverpool University, where I'm a specialist in football finance, and I'm very pleased to have as my guest, my interrogatee, this morning, Charlie Marshall from ECA. So, first of all, Charlie, I guess ECA historically has had a particular role, but I think people aren't necessarily familiar with ECA in 2019. So could you start off by telling us about what the role of ECA is in the present market?
Absolutely. Thanks, Kieran, and hi, everyone. Yeah, we're over a decade old now, so we're sort of almost a teenager, although probably not as sort of well known in the first decade as we sort of are now. We were born out of, I would say, some attempts that have taken place over the years to give the clubs representation when it comes to sort of the most important matters of sort of global football, the dimensions on which clubs increasingly play on the international markets. Probably the most well-known one previously to ECA forming was the G14, which was a group of the sort of very top clubs, sort of by economic power, if you like, who banded together to sort of lobby for certain kind of reforms and certain aspects of representation, which had its role, I think, and had its time. ECA was born off the back of that, after a few other attempts in the middle, really with a much kind of broader representation notion, that the fact that actually, European club football and the sort of the position of European clubs on the global stage was about much more than just the very, very top clubs. We often talk about the concept of a pyramid that sustains and supports football, right from the grassroots up to the very top, without which football wouldn't be what it is today. So the ECA tries to model that pyramid in a sensible way, which gives both clubs adequate representation and also gives the kind of governing bodies and the decision makers in sport the ability to speak to sort of a single voice, which is an important thing. I suppose the final thing to say in terms of who are the clubs within ECA, we often talk about the leading clubs within Europe. Europe being made up of 54, 55 national associations, all of whom have domestic football, and all of whom have clubs which participate in European competitions. ECA represents those clubs who regularly participate in the European competitions. And as of about a month ago, we have 246 clubs who are members across Europe.
Right, so those are all the clubs that are regularly participating in both
Indeed.
Champions League and Europa League competitions.
Absolutely, and in all the qualifying that sits behind them.
Okay, cool. So we're in a very interesting position at the market at present. What would you say is going to be the main challenges for clubs that you represent in terms of your relationship with UEFA and the domestic leagues? And what are the opportunities? Because football is developing all the time, and European football is seen in more than just Europe.
Absolutely. Challenges and opportunities, for sure. I think we need to think about the sort of context of where we sit within the wider, not just sport, but within the wider kind of media and content landscape, and then even beyond that on the sort of social and even sort of geopolitical landscape. we're in the privileged position of being part of an industry which is by some degree the most popular sport globally. Football outranks by a long, long way the next nearest sort of sporting format, sporting code, which would be American football, but it's sort of double the size if you look at the revenues. Within that industry, European football is the lion's share. So, in many ways, we're sitting, within a market which is the most important sports market in the world, and by the way, is growing at an astonishing rate. If you go to any other industries, particularly within the media space, but even more broadly, and you saw a sector that was growing more or less at sort of double digits every year for the past 12, 15 years, that would be astonishing. So we are in a position of growth. That does not mean that we can sit on our laurels and sort of let it happen. And I think one of the big themes that at ECA we have, and that we work with both our clubs and sort of the other actors in the market on, is this need for innovation, this need for a continual drive for change in order to keep the industry fresh and to keep it where it is in an increasingly difficult market environment. When we say difficult, what does that actually mean? There are a number of different things that I think are happening on the macro scale that give us cause for really sort of careful consideration about how we want to run this industry. Let's call out a few. I mean, I think there are certainly social and consumer trends, and much of them brought on by new consumer behaviours and sort of new technology platforms, new forms of content distribution, which fundamentally change the way that the product is consumed. Without, I'm sure we'll go into a bit more detail later on, but so, we've got a whole bunch of changes in that space. I think my mic's cutting in and out a little bit. We, brought on by that, we have some genuine sort of, I think, commercial issues to face and to deal with. I think we are sort of on the cusp of a commercial model which has been 2-3 decades in the making and has sustained the growth that I talked about earlier. That is changing. That is absolutely changing, the way that content is commercialized. I don't know whether I should wait for a techie to come and help my microphone, but we'll carry on. So many changes to content distribution, the economic model that sort of sits underneath it. And then I think we're also facing a series of almost geopolitical changes. If we look at the different countries across Europe, as we said, all of them have a role within European football. We need to make sure that football itself remains relevant and strong, not just within the bigger markets, but within the smaller markets as well. So we need to look very, very carefully, again, about how we sort of govern and run the industry to make sure that there is that sort of spread on as broad a possible basis.
Okay, cool. Now, you say you represent 246 clubs. I think one of the things which has been most interesting and perhaps controversial over the course of the developments in terms of your relationship with UEFA is the potential expansion of European football into a third tier. Presently, we have 80 clubs effectively in the Europa League and the Champions League. How would this third tier operate, and how many clubs eventually do you envisage being participants within this three-tier system?
Yeah, absolutely. One of the strongest calls that we have across the membership base is, thank you. Do you want me to use this instead? Yeah, probably safest. One of the biggest calls we have from across the membership is for more opportunities to participate in European competitions. As you rightly say, if you take this season across Champions League and Europa League, you have 80 teams participating in the group stages of those competitions, 32 in the Champions League and 48 in the Europa League. The third competition, the introduction of the third competition, is about expanding the base of participation, principally. It's also about refining the shape of the European system, which at the moment is the sort of 32-48 kind of pyramid shape, to turn that into something which is a little bit more linear. So at the same time as introducing a third competition, the second tier of competition, the current Europa League, will be refined from 48 teams to 32. So you end up with a 32, 32, 32 structure, giving you 96 teams. So that's an increase of 16 teams in the group stages, plus all of then the qualification that sits behind that. So participation is really at the heart of it. More opportunities to play in Europe, more opportunities for clubs, and these are the clubs which we won't talk about on an everyday basis. I would say it's a mixture of brand new clubs who want to come in and sort of forge their European stories for the first time, clubs from smaller leagues who have been able to kind of grow businesses and grow sporting propositions. It's also, I think, about clubs who feel the pressure of a rapidly evolving economy, who might not be in the bigger leagues, but who feel that they would benefit from more opportunity to play in Europe. So clubs of sort of yesteryear, I won't name any, people know who they are, but who could be given more chance to forge a story within Europe.
And presumably this would give them greater certainty, because there will be, I think, greater emphasis from what you're saying upon European success as being a precursor for future involvement in European competition, and less reliance on a domestic. Is that a fair comment?
Well, there's a little bit of that. I think before we even go there, there are too many clubs right now whose European story stops in July and August, having started all of a few weeks before. And for many of those clubs, arguably that's the most important part of the season. Not widely thought about or not widely known, certainly within the sort of top markets. So rewarding performance on a more sustained basis across the season by, for example, giving more opportunities to participate in group stage games is really important. That has a very positive knock-on effect when it comes to things like planning the sporting and financial aspects of a club. So how long can I kind of, or how far in advance can I predict what my performance is going to be, both on the pitch and off the pitch, which hopefully has long-term positive effects when it comes to things like deciding about squads and deciding about stadiums and all the rest of it. So that's sort of, I think, what you're starting to get at with this notion of kind of more sort of merit-based opportunities to play in Europe.
Brilliant. I can't talk about club competitions without talking about 2024, where realistically these new changes are going to take place. Clearly there's going to be a very long discussion period and debate and gestation. What is the rationale behind your members pushing for change? Do you see your main rivals as being the NFL? Do you see it as being from football elsewhere in the world? Or do you just see it as being the general role of entertainment? Because football is competing for the same dollars as Taylor Swift and the same dollars as the Star Wars. So how do you perceive the main issues from 2024 onwards?
Yeah, so it's certainly part of an evolving story. To think about sort of 2024 as something that is sort of coming out of the blue and is brand new is not really how we think about it. We've ever since, I think, ECA has started to represent these clubs, the dialogue about the improvement and evolution of the European competitions has been fundamental to what we do. The discussion we just had about the third competition, which will be introduced still in 2 years' time, we're still 2 years away from it, that will fundamentally change, that will evolve the shape of the competitions between 2021 and 2024. And of course, we are in the middle of a fairly, well-reported and sort of well-opined on debate about the future of the competitions past that cycle from 2024 onwards. So what do we kind of think about when we think that far into the future? So we're now thinking 5 years into the future, which is, an old adage I always like to remember, is that we tend to underestimate the medium term and we tend to overestimate the medium term and underestimate the long term. it's a long way away. So there are a few things. One is product innovation, to pick up on what I was saying before and you were just saying then. The need to continually innovate and adapt the product itself for the realities of the environment, the marketplace, and the sporting and social environments that we sit within. Even with the introduction of the new competition, we know what we are looking at for the next 5 years. That means that as fans, we know what the competitions are going to be. As media and commercial partners, we know what the competitions are going to be. We love them, they're great, they're at the sort of, the pinnacle of sport, but that's not an excuse to think about further innovation and further evolution. As you rightly say, the marketplace moves much more sort of quickly and in different directions than we're used to planning on. So-called competitors are not within the sport, and it's actually, I think some of the debate has been very useful over the summer to kind of sharpen everyone's view on exactly who's competing with who. To focus on intra-football competition is a red herring, and it will only, it won't lead to sort of future success. We need to look more broadly. We need to look as an industry about who we are competing with in the future, within the sort of consumer and entertainment landscape, whether that is Taylor Swift or actually whether it's Fortnite, which it is more likely. I think, personally speaking, one of the clear challenges we have as an industry is, as the population ages and as younger demographics change their behavior, in my view, in a fundamental way, in a way that we haven't seen in previous generations, who tend to acquire the habits of their parents as they get older and take debt on properties and things like that. There seem to me to be some fundamental structural changes taking place within the way in which fans engage with content. So that means that football is suddenly on a much broader scale of competition, not just sport, but activity and how people spend their time more broadly. So sorry, that's the product innovation piece. We obviously also think, when we think about competitions, about other things that we're trying to achieve on behalf of the clubs when it comes to the structure and the format of these competitions. One, which picks up on actually the third competition, is more participation and more merit-based participation within Europe. We feel that there are other avenues to explore when it comes to the question of what merit actually means in terms of what makes a club great. Is it simply the performance at home in the domestic leagues that make it great? Clearly that is a major, major part. Is it also clubs' performance on the European stage that makes them great? If those two things can be blended in some way, we may end up with something that feels a little bit more sort of equitable than at the moment, where there are many, many clubs who feel that they perform very well in Europe from one year to the next, but then are reset back to zero when it comes to their participation in the competitions sort of next time round. So that is another thing that's part of it. And the final thing to mention is clearly the sort of economic side and what the European competitions represent to European football when it comes to money, when it comes to income. The sort of UEFA system of competitions and the philosophy and principles of the distribution of the income from those competitions is deliberately designed to be a very equitable as possible, a model of distributing income across Europe. So if you think about Europe, as many people do, in terms of the sort of big economies, probably the top five, France, Italy, Spain, Germany, and England, and then the other 50 nations that make up Europe rather, the distribution of UEFA income generally is 60% goes to the big five and 40% goes to the others. That 40% that goes to the 50 nations is double what those nations pay in terms of access to rights for the competitions. So you can start to see, and there's many, many things that sit behind it, but you can start to see the dynamics of if you like, a sort of subsidy model which Europe represents. Now, if the competitions themselves can continue to grow and can continue to provide the sort of opportunity to all different shapes and sizes of clubs, then it should be able to continue to generate income and to sustain this sort of subsidy model that exists.
How do you therefore see the impact on domestic leagues with the increase in the size of European competitions? Presumably they will still be independent, they'll still set their own domestic and local rules, and there'll have to be some compromises on both sides. Was that a fair assessment?
It's a fair assessment, yeah. Again, one of the outcomes of this continual debate and consultation process that is going on across the industry about the future of competitions, I think is a greater awareness and understanding between the different stakeholders of how interactions have built up over time. How the interactions, for example, between domestic leagues, big, medium and small, play out when it comes to the shape and structure of European competitions. So very careful analysis of the links between them is very important to sustaining the whole ecosystem. And you know, there's been sort of push and pull on various different key features of football competitions, access lists and calendars, and we talked a little bit about distribution of income. That those things are all sort of in the mixing pot, whirring around through this consultation exercise that both UEFA, ECA, clubs, leagues are all going through right now. And I suppose to sort of answer the question directly, no one seeks to impose anything on anyone. It's a balance that we need to reach in service of growing European football.
Great, right. And time's catching up with us. So just to finish, imagine we're here in 5 years' time. You're probably an avatar of us rather than us sitting here face to face. What would you envisage as being the biggest changes in European football compared to where we are in 2019-20?
Yeah, it's a very interesting question. I mean, the first thing to say is in 5 years' time, which again seems like a long period of time, we'll just be at the very beginning of the cycle of 24 onwards, 24 to 27. So all of the things that we're discussing, they'll just be kicking off. So there's a long time to go, still in that debate. We'll have had 5 more Champions League winners. We'll have had 5 more Europa League winners. We'll have had 3 winners of the third competition. So, a lot more trophies and a lot more clubs who have had honours. I think from a sort of competitions perspective, both within Europe and domestically, I think, and I very much hope we'll still be sitting here and able to talk about some of the sort of growth and importance of the industry that we talked about at the beginning of this conversation. I very much believe that will still be true. I think the biggest change will be in the way in which the product is consumed, distributed and consumed. I think the advent of new distribution technologies, new production technologies, new ways of thinking about and sort of, if you like, communicating with fans that clubs can do and that competitions can do. I'm sure that, and I hope there'll be many, many other discussions over the next 2 days here about some of the sort of specific innovations that could come to pass within 5 years. But I can only really imagine, how the product itself is consumed, and I don't think it's going to be predominantly people sitting in chairs like this watching big screens like that. There'll still be quite a lot of that, but the fragmentation of viewing and consumption will be rife and a very good thing for the industry.
Thank you very much. Charlie Marshall, ECA, thank you very much.
Thanks.
Thank you very much, Charlie, Kieran. People from the University of Liverpool are always welcome here. Well, At 11:35, we're going to start with the next panel, which is going to be massive, because you know Atletico de Madrid, you all know the club, you all know how it's been in the past years. So we're going to have here Julio Sen, a lawyer, and Miguel Ángel Marín, CEO of Atletico de Madrid. So at 11:35, we'll be right back here with the rise of Atletico de Madrid. Así que todo el mundo preparado, que a las 11:35 volvemos, un pequeño descanso rapidito para coger un poco de respiración, porque a partir de 35 aquí tenemos a Miguel Ángel Gil Marín con el siguiente panel de el Atlético de Madrid. The Rise of Atletico de Madrid. We'll be right back here, 11:35, a las 11:35. Hasta ahora.